No, y'all. All right, so let's talk, and I'm going to pop the question into the chat as well, so everyone can follow along. So we're going to jump right in. Question one: how can LGBTQIA plus teachers be advocates for their students while still, it's a big one, maintaining their own safety and well-being in international education settings? I'll let y'all dive right on in here.
Sure. Want me to answer first, Kanako?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a really loaded question because it's very contextual. I have the privilege of being in a country that doesn't criminalize LGBTQ identities. So I know that looks very different if you're in a country that does criminalize those identities. And there are a lot more than folks would typically realize. And I think the thing that comes to mind for this with me, how can LGBTQIA teachers advocate for children while still maintaining their own safety, is really knowing your context, knowing where you can push, knowing what's in your sphere of influence, and maintaining your own safety within that while still advocating for your students. And Joshua Pays, who's a queer theory researcher and English language teacher, they write a lot about queering the classroom space. They also talk a lot about frigid contexts, and those are spaces where LGBTQIA plus identities not necessarily are criminalized, but also maybe unsafe spaces for queer community members, in that you can still problematize narrative or normative discourse within those contexts as well. You might have to do so in a bit more of a creative way, and that takes a little bit more strategic thought and planning. So I think that's my biggest way to support queer students and maintaining your own personal safety, is really just knowing the context that you're in.
Yeah, I agree, Justin. And to add on, I think it's oftentimes, I think queer educators feel isolated or alone in doing the work when you don't have other queer people at school. And like just yesterday, was it yesterday, Justin, that I sent you a message and I asked them a question about how to support a queer student better, because I didn't have the answer. And I felt like I could reach out to Justin to ask. And so for your well-being and not taking on all of the queer issues at your school and all the things that the queer students are going through at your school, this space is so important, whether that's through a one-on-one conversation or on Twitter, or just anyone that you could reach out to for support, so that you're not you're not the only support for the queer students at your school, because like that'll lead to burnout pretty quickly. So yeah, thanks, Justin.
Yeah, and it's true that burnout is real. And Shay Martin wrote this article I just linked quite a while ago on National Coming Out Day, and they're also a queer educator and writer, and they share too that like it's not like queer educators don't have to also be out as well. That's a personal choice, again, dependent on context. But even if you're in a space that is safer than most, like it's not expected for queer people to be out. And I think there's a lot of pressure for queer teachers to be out to their colleagues and students. But again, really that's a personal choice, and it's totally okay to to not share that information. I know some cis straight teachers who are like, my work life is my work life, and I don't bring in like personal anecdotes into that. Also, like in my own context, I often feel like I'm the only one advocating for LGBTQ students and identities. And my cis heterosexual co-conspirators also need to be doing this as well. You don't have to be a queer person to be talking about queer issues or challenging gender norms and stereotypes in classrooms. There's a lot of issues being the only person really doing that, and also sharing that identity as well. You know, people think I have some hidden agenda. I don't have any cis or straight allies who are vocal. So it's just like the one non-binary teacher, you know, making a fuss, essentially. You know, I've been called a troublemaker. I've been called militant. And I think a lot of that stems from being, yeah, right. Advocating for my pronouns is apparently militant. So like other people like with that privilege, especially cis heterosexual people, need to also be advocating for these things too, not just me, not just the queer teachers on campus.
Yeah. And also for well-being too, like I interviewed with a couple different schools. I talked to when I was looking for this job, and I talked to people who already worked there. And I felt like, knowing Justin and their experience in Chiang Mai, I knew that there would be admin support, right? And that was really important to me. Some of the places that I interviewed with, current teachers couldn't really say whether their admin would be an ally or not. And so at that point I was like, okay, well, I don't want to work there. And so because I figured if I'd worked there, I would be fighting a lot. And it'll be so difficult for me to just exist the way I am. And so that I think that's really important too, when if you are looking for a job.
I noticed Elizabeth asked in the chat too, like as an ally, besides stickers and posters, via content, whenever I can make an organic connection, how can I advocate for my LGBTQIA students? Those things are all excellent. Even like at my current school, the GSA facilitator is a straight cis man, and he's just really passionate about inclusion in LGBTQIA plus students and identities and what that looks like at a school. So I thought that was pretty amazing to have like an ally at that, you know, making that organizational change. And I would say looking at your own context, think about the systemic change that you could possibly make. What are the students doing? What are, if there's queer teachers that are open in your context, what movements are they leading? And seeing how you can support that as well. And also, again, I'm very alone in this, but looking at what you're teaching too, one thing I always do when I'm teaching is asking myself what voices are missing in this unit that I'm teaching, whose perspectives are missing, and embedding queer characters or in queer storytelling and queer folks in history, like within my unit of instruction, to include those voices and just constantly destigmatize the discourse surrounding around queer identities, because there still is a lot of stigmatization. And even Christina, you and I were talking about this last night. Many schools are focusing on the L and the G, you know, just lesbian and gay identities, but there's still a tremendous amount of stigmatization around bisexual identities and trans people and asexuality. And gender nonconforming identity. So just like we need to constantly be embedding those voices and that dialogue within our, not just our classroom, but also what we talk about on a systemic level as well.
Yeah, Christina just said there's power in numbers when allies speak out, and I agree. A lot of the suggestions that I make to admin and stuff like that, they're not ideas that I have, they're the ideas that the students have that they don't feel like they can voice to teachers and admin, right? So one of the ways that you could advocate as an ally is to be the facilitator of that conversation, whether that's cluing the admins in on these things that the kids are saying, or even being the person to say, hey, these are things that our kids are wanting. What do you think? Do you want to go talk to this group of kids who have these ideas? And creating a space for students to advocate for themselves, I think is one of the it's just a good way to not take that advocacy, like that power away from the kids, but you are helping them express their needs.
And Adrian said, you know, I'm assuming trans identities has been hard at our school and country. Yeah, a lot, again, it's contextual, right? I'm privileged to be in Germany, where there aren't laws or is not as much stigmatization as other places. It also needs to be said that I'm an American, and I mostly present as masculine too. So there's as more masculine, I suppose. So it's like I'm also speaking from those places of privilege, and that needs to be acknowledged. And I think if you're in that type of context, there are trans people like in Adrian in the Cayman Islands. What are they doing to advocate for trans rights and what movements are there that are happening? We just may not know about them. International schools don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can look to what the community is already doing and empower that and bring people within the community into our discussion, into being facilitators or being consultants. Like in Thailand and Chiang Mai specifically, there are a lot of organizations that advocate for trans people and that like educate schools, rural schools in Thailand about HIV and sex education. So like, again, look within your community, see what's already happening. It's going to take research, but there are definitely people making change. You just have to look for it.
All right, I'm going to bring Ridwan Qadir to come on up here, introduce himself. We're going to bring him into the conversation. Come on, Ridwan, we got you. I know that, don't worry, y'all, because the time messed me up last all these, because it was funny. Like, and then Christina sent that message today about the time. I was like, oh, time zone scheduling. We got you.
I'm so sorry, everyone. I've been looking so forward to this, been so prepared for this, and then my time said 11, and I'm like, oh. So I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm really so appreciative to ALOC and to you, Kevin. Thank you so much for providing this platform for us. And, you know, we have an opportunity to talk about an amazing topic that so many of us have so close to our hearts. And I'm just grateful for allowing us the space and the opportunity. So thank you so, so much. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Hey, I see a few of my peeps in here. Hey, everyone. Good to see all of you. Justin and Kaneko, did you guys have an opportunity to introduce yourselves? Yeah,
we were answering the first question, and then we just got into some dialogue about what people were saying in the chat.
Perfect. So just to introduce myself, I'm Ridwan Qadir. I am the DIB coordinator at Nido de Aguilas. I am an 8th grade humanities teacher, so I do 2 roles. And I also do some extensive work with ASEA, the International School Association of Africa. I'm South African, and yeah, I just feel it's so important to have an African voice represented on a platform like ICEA, just, you know, being a gay African man, knowing that the only country that I can work in Africa is South Africa. Can't work in any other African country. And so we're trying really hard to work with that. And so I am, again, just humbled to have a platform like ALOC where we can talk about this and yeah, see how we can envision a better world for all of us. So we're going to get right back into it and just move on to the second question. Before we get on to that, I just wanted to bring in our panelists here and maybe just talk about your experience just with hiring, right? How has that been for you? I know hiring as a practice for LGBTQ community members is really hard. Now add on to the fact if you have kids or you have a partner, it is really, really hard to get hired and to get, so can you maybe just talk a little bit about your hiring journey? Maybe Justin, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. And Kanako and I have both we're both hiring last year as well, and have a lot of can talk directly to that. Hiring as an openly queer person is extremely challenging, and not a lot of cis straight people realize, like, most countries, and I'm partnered as well, I have a same-sex partner, most countries will not provide my partner a visa. And we both hold American passports, so it doesn't matter what passport you're holding. That adds another layer of complexity as well, by the way. But it really negates a lot of places we can work. And even working, we were considering even going to the US for this upcoming year, because we have to transition again, and that is terrifying because of all the anti-trans legislation that's being passed, and there's so much violence, like physical violence towards queer people, especially if you're visibly queer. And I made the decision to be open about my pronouns and my gender identity on my resume. And I know a lot of people don't make that decision. They choose not to, and that's okay too. I think I'm in a place of privilege where I feel more comfortable doing that. And it's totally okay for people not to, because there is so much discrimination around hiring queer people, especially as I work in a primary school. I teach second graders, first graders, and primary kids. So a lot of educators or leaders and teachers are very hesitant to bring in an openly queer person to teach primary school. There's an added layer of stigma when you involve young children. It's a little less so if you're a high school teacher or a middle school teacher. And then just dealing with constant microaggressions from recruiters. Oh my gosh. I remember at the job fair, I opened with my pronouns when I introduced myself to some principals, and one principal at a school in Germany, I was like, oh, I'm Justin, I use they them pronouns. And he just was kind of like, that's okay. I'm like, better be okay. Like, what's going on? And then other principals, when I kind of share about my experiences, because they always ask, they're always shocked when I say I've experienced a lot of discrimination from like the parent community at schools and from other educators, and they're always so shocked. And I'm like, this is pretty normal. This is like expected at this, I think people with marginalized identities expect that. And it's kind of it's a part of our everyday life. So it's just I've had to manage a lot of people's reactions. And I just kind of have to like roll my eyes and listen, and then find a way to change the subject or interject in some way. But hiring is extremely challenging. There is a tremendous amount of bias in hiring at international schools, and it's not just based on gender identity and sexual orientation. It's also about which passports that we hold, which languages that we speak. There's a tremendous amount of native speakerism that's rampant within the international school scene. Colorism, all of those things. There's so many intersecting identities with hiring.
Absolutely. You spoke so eloquently, and I can tell that, again, just thinking from your experience, right? It's a double-edged sword, right? You want to come in and you want to be who you are, right? Because I firmly believe it's like, this is who I am. If you don't like me, then obviously it's not going to work in that community, right? And so it literally is a double-edged sword, right? But I always think just being upfront, like you said, like, this is who I am, right? Because this is a part of you, want to bring your true authentic self into the community at all times, right? That's how we all thrive and succeed. Thank you, Justin. Kanyako, can we bring you in here for your experience?
Yes. My name is pronounced Kanako.
Kanako, I'm
Just
so sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, so we actually talked about this a little bit before you hopped in, but for me, so my previous school was not ready for any conversation things. And I knew that my admin was not supportive of me having conversations with kids at all. So when I was recruiting, I was looking for a school that had supportive admin and even just queer communities established within the school. And Justin had done that in Chiang Mai. I took over Justin's position. So Justin had done that and I felt very comfortable. Our school is owned by the Christian Church of Thailand. And so when Justin asked if I wanted to apply to the school, I was like, well, I don't know. Christian schools are not really what I'm looking for. But it was a good lesson in like, I gotta give anything a try, right? Because I love where I am and I love the community that that I have here in Chiang Mai, and the support from admin has been amazing. And so yeah, just make sure you've got people who are going to have your back, whether that's colleagues or admin.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
And again, I think a lot of cis heterosexual folks, white folks, sometimes don't realize this when I talk to them, but people with marginalized identities, like, we look out for each other, right? Like, when we're hiring, I'm not applying to, just any school. I'm on the ALOC page. I'm in these spaces. Be like, has anybody worked here? Is this a safer place for me? Like, what was your experience? We have to do that vetting ourselves. And even if a school, even if a school has like an equity statement or policies, or is like known to be more inclusive or liberal, like, that does not mean anything. I need to know like what people's experiences are working there, to know if I can be treated with respect and dignity and humanity. I mean, I worked at this school that Kanako's at, and it is like a historically Christian missionary school. And I experienced more discrimination at a liberal, non-denominational school than I did at this Christian missionary school. If that's telling, for any reason. But so this is like an extra layer of complexity when we're recruiting, because we truly don't know if a place is safer unless we reach out to folks within our community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we think about, I was having this conversation with students yesterday, actually, just with the little safe club we have at our school community. And, we're talking about how we need our allies around us, right? We need people who support us, just like we need everyone else in our community who support us. And at the end of the day, it's about that inclusiveness, but more importantly, it's about respecting our identities, respecting who we are, and respecting what we bring to that community. So I want to pivot the conversation just a little bit into just that space, just thinking about how can we as LGBTQ educators best advocate for our students while still maintaining their own safety and well-being. You know, it's one thing for us to be like, yes, we can be who we are because we're the adults in those environments, right? But how can we still advocate for our students, right? In certain areas, in certain communities, we know that it is not safe for students to be out. It is not safe for, right? But what can we do to help, I don't know, keep our kids safe? Like, you know, so we have some of these affinity groups, so we have these clubs like Safe Club, but is that really enough? What do you think?
So
oh, go ahead, Kenneth.
yeah, sorry. This was the first question that Kevin posted before you came in, so we kind of went into it. But again, like, I think making sure that we act as the facilitator for kids advocating for themselves, whether, you know, connecting kids to the right people, or we I guess take the conversation from the kids to the admin. Yeah.
And GSAs too, and rainbow clubs and things like those are a great first step. They're definitely, it's not definitely like the be all end all, right? Because a lot of schools that have GSAs and have the privilege of having them, it's still like, maybe I've noticed that a lot of schools have GSAs for upper school, like high school students and middle school students. The new school I'm moving to next year has a rainbow club for grades 3, 4, and 5 students. We still have kids in like kindergarten and first grade who are left out of those conversations, right? And a part of like what I'm really passionate about is introducing those conversations about gender and about identity and about sexuality with our youngest students, and they're capable of having those conversations. It's almost always the adults projecting their fear onto kids about having those, about what that looks like, because the kids are perfectly capable of having those discussions and having really beautiful conversations about it, and engaging in that dialogue in different ways. It's just the adults that are often reluctant to do so.
Yeah, I agree. I'm more in both of the schools that I've been at, I'm more out to the students than I am to the colleagues, because with students, I can kind of expect knowing the students well, I can kind of expect the response I'm going to get. With the adults, I can never say for sure that they aren't going to make some queer-phobic comments or whatever, right? So I not weirdly, I find it easier to come out to students and to talk about it with students. And I think the students who do ask are asking because they're curious, because they want to know like more about the queer community. And so it's coming from a place of curiosity, whereas with adults, it's more like just looking for something that they could, I don't know, pick on, or right. So yeah, coming out to kids is much easier.
Yeah, and kids get it. Kids are so amazing. I often just listening into conversations. I teach middle school, and sometimes just listening in on kids' conversations, like they know so much more. And I sometimes feel like they should be the ones standing up and giving some of these talks, right? And talking to some of the teachers, because they know so much more. And we just want to, like, again, someone mentioned in the comments, like, you know, I think as adults, we're afraid, or as parents, they're afraid of that gay propaganda. Like, oh, if we talk about this, we're going to make kids gay, we're going to turn kids gay, right? And so again, it's, you know, when you listen to kids and when they speak and when they ask these questions, we realize that there's so much more that we can learn from them rather than you know, the other way around sometimes. Okay, so just thinking about our experiences here and thinking about what can international schools learn from the experiences of LGBTQIA teachers in order to create schools that are more inclusive and equitable and safe for everyone in our community, right? I think, again, as a Black man, I think about all of those things in often, you know, marginalized communities. There's so much experience, there's so much that we deal with every single day. What do you think international schools and the leaders specifically can learn from our experiences as LGBTQ teachers?
I'd like to answer that and also kind of go back to some stuff that Kanako was saying as well. And it just does answer this, like what we can do. Adrian had said gender is one of the first identities children are exposed to, and that's exactly right. Like children internalize gender roles by, I think it was like 2 years old, 3 years old. And that also includes like children internalize race and skin tone and things very early as well. And all of us in this room are complicit at teaching gender. We all have done it. Whenever we pick up a book to read to our kids that has a heterosexual couple, we're teaching about heterosexuality and we're teaching about gender. Whenever we're picking up a book and reading about about characters that fall within certain gender stereotypes, those are the messages that kids are internalizing constantly. It's impossible to not teach about gender or sexuality. We just do it in such a way that only highlights heterosexuality and cisgender identities. We exclude, and this is something we've also internalized, right? It's exclusionary of gender diversity and people with different sexual orientations. And that's unfortunately so much of the world that we live in. And it's up to us then, under knowing this, it's up to us to problematize that and actively challenge that every single day. Whenever a kid makes a snide comment or a comment about gender, about girls doing this and boys doing that, and whenever, and I teach second grade, so like those things happen all the time, like, oh, girls, this color's for girls, or boys like this more, and like those things are constant, and even 7-year-olds are saying these things. We have to challenge that every single time and don't let it slide. And that's not to say to reprimand students. It's just to question and actively be like, hey, is that really true? Like, do all girls have long hair? Like, those are the things that those are the conversations I'm having in class all the time. Or I think one kid said something about only girls wearing earrings, and I wear earrings every day to school. I'm like, well, hello, like what? And then but then like what Kanako said earlier, they approach it with curiosity, and we need to make sure we're never shaming children, because then that, sends a message that we shouldn't be talking about these things. Kids say and do really poignant and intelligent things, and that's celebrated. So if we just question it and get them thinking, like, they can come to the realization on their own.
Yeah. So sorry, turning that into a learning moment, right? So like, how can we turn that into a learning moment? That's all we all have to model all the time. We don't know all the answers, but we're gonna figure it out together. Right. I love how you say that. Let's turn it into a learning moment. We don't want to have kids not asking these questions, because that's how we open up that dialogue and create that safe space. Yeah.
And even as I'm reading a book called The Year of Billy Miller with my students as a read aloud. It's a chapter book, and there's some bits in it that are really gendered, and that could, like, as I'm reading it out, like I read the whole thing before reading it with the kids. As I'm like reading through it, I'm like catching little things as I'm reading it, and I change the wording. So it's like, I'm not going to reinforce that in this instance, right? And there's some things that the characters say about boys and girls, and in that moment, it's easier to just like shift the language a little bit to be more inclusive than to sort of reinforce gender stereotypes and then have a conversation about it. So it's like there's a time and place for that, and it's like we're just enjoying a read aloud. I'm going to shift the language a little bit.
Yeah. I just focus on my why, right? Like, this work is important to me because I didn't have queer role models growing up. I didn't, let alone like an Asian queer person. I didn't have that. And so as much as this work is for my students, it also is for myself. I know it's like cliche, but I'm trying to be the person I wish I had around when I was younger. And that's why I focus so much on visibility. Because I think that as long as we're focused on that, changes can start happening. Maybe I don't know, maybe it'll only impact one kid at the school that I'm at. But like, to me, that's still something.
Absolutely. Like we all say, right? I think in the email when we were corresponding, I said, we can't be what we can't see, right? It's so important to be visible. It's so important. And that's why, I was giggling, I was writing down some stuff as you were talking, Justin. I love that you wear your earrings. I love that you because again, it shows, right? And it's an easy one. Boys can't wear earrings. Hello, right? And it's such a young age, how amazing that your students are getting that. I just want to circle back quickly to just talking about that, Justin. What has been the parent reaction to your being your true authentic self, wearing your earrings, having these conversations? What has been the parent or the community reaction to that?
Yeah, and I present mostly masculine at in my workplace. I'm still doing little things to play with my gender presentation, just at my own pace. And I use they, them pronouns. I identify openly as non-binary with the students, and we've had a conversation with that as what that's meant. And the parent reaction this year has been really challenging. I've been very openly discriminated against from the parent community. I've been bullied online. Kids have been removed from my classroom. And again, it's like my cis heterosexual white leaders were like, oh, this is such a surprise from our community. I'm like, no, it's not. This is not a surprise. This is like the way I live every day. And it brings back that what we can do to support queer students and just queer identifying people within a school is like, there's two things to that. The school I'm at has been like this, my staff, my colleagues have been really supportive, and they've changed language within policy to remove like gendered language, to use they singular instead of him or her. And they've been really intentional with that, which is awesome. That also shouldn't have to be the case when a non-binary person who uses they pronouns joins your community. That should just be the default, right? Because queer people notice. We notice. If I see gendered language in a policy at a school that I'm like applying to, I take notice of that. I take notice of, is there anybody that looks like me on the leadership team? And those affect the decisions that I make of whether or not a place is a safer place. And then I think there also needs to another huge way to support queer people is to educate parents. That doesn't mean like changing the parents' opinions or minds. That's not the focus. I think if my current school would have educated the parents more before I got hired, I think I still would have had parents do and say the horrible things that they did. I think, though, there could have been a system in place to protect me and my well-being, and also a system in place to not necessarily react to, but address the harm that parents have caused. Because since my leaders were caught off guard, it was like a very knee-jerk reaction, and it wasn't a great reaction either, you know? So that piece needs to be addressed. There needs to be education for the parent community. And one thing that I'm helping a colleague organize, myself and my colleague in the GSA organize, is a student panel. So the high school, middle school GSA is going to host a student panel for parents, and it'll be an open discussion about gender, about sexuality, and about visibility, and why visibility is important to them. And the parents will get it from a student's perspective. And I think that is the beginning of really educating parents. And if we have counselors in here, I think it needs to be also done from a restorative practice perspective, where counselors can educate parents and kind of dig into the parent biases and help them understand how they're causing harm and what they can do to make amends to it. But anyway, yeah, that's been my experience so far. It hasn't been great, but it also hasn't been surprising.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you for sharing your story. What I'm taking away from that story is that you are setting a precedent. You have your administration, your leadership, you have them thinking about, hey, how best can we support this? And so now they are going to be thinking about, what do we need to put in place for when we do hire another person, right, who uses they, them pronouns. And so I feel you're leaving that community in a better place and a better space. Thank you so much for sharing that.
And what brings me joy too with that, sorry, one last thing to it is, like, no matter the parent, like what the parents say or think, and at this point, I really don't care. What just makes me so happy is that these little 7 and 8 year olds will always remember Mix Garcia. They will, my 7 and 8 year olds use my pronouns correctly, and they correct each other, and they correct their parents, which I think is fierce. That's more than I can say about my own parents, right? My own parents don't even use my pronouns accurately or effectively as much as my 8 year olds do. And like knowing that brings me peace.
Love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Can I just jump into and also address the question that Elizabeth asked about, like, what do you do when kids are open to queer communities but parents aren't? One of the things that my current head of school has done is to sort of center the students and their well-being. She talked about how when there was pushback about the GSA this year again, she talked to the parents and said, like, listen, queer kids have they're at the highest risk of suicide and depression and anxiety, and not providing a space for them to be themselves is going to negatively affect the kids' well-being. And do you want that for your child, right? And I think that was I think that really hit the parents, and they were like, oh, so it's not about sexuality, it's not about gender, it's about their well-being. So yeah, I think, Elizabeth, that might be just centering the kids and their well-being is probably a good approach to try to get parents on board, or at least maybe not like waving rainbow flags yet, but at least not sending rude emails to teachers.
Absolutely. It's also about, joy and happiness. I mean, just in my role as a DIB coordinator, we had to do a presentation with the parents about how can your kids experience joy and happiness, right, through the lens of DIB, right? it's about how they experience their lives and their worlds every single day when they come into the school community, right? We want everyone to be happy. We want everyone to bring their true authentic selves to school. And that's what about no parent is going to say, I don't want my child to be happy, right? And so you beautifully said that. Thank you so much. We have a few minutes left. I'd really love to open up. There's been a lot of chatter within the discussion in the chat, but I want to open it up to audience members. What questions do you have for Kanako and for Justin? Yeah, maybe let's dig into like the last 3 minutes of some question time.
I'd like to briefly address what Christina wrote about being protective of students in those like student panel situations. I completely agree with you. My colleague and I are avoiding like just like parading queer students in front of a very hostile group of parents, right? So the first thing, like we had this idea and brought it up with the students, and they're super keen. They love, like they prepare slideshows for each other about sexuality, and like this GSA group are really active and they're like super nerds and we love it. So they're really keen on it. And second, there's weekly parent meetings that already take place. So we're inserting that within those weekly parent meetings. So there's more people who just come to those every week anyway. So it's not just like a sign up thing. It's like a lot of parents will already have been there to talk about other school related things. So we want to optimize as many people coming as possible. And the next thing we're doing is we're going to field parent questions beforehand. So it's not just a free for all. We also want to avoid parents like asking and saying really problematic things and like offending some of these kids and like traumatizing them. I will also be present and moderating with my colleague and my principal. So if there is something that happens, like we will take on that burden from students. So we're thinking really carefully about it and just thinking of all the ways we can reduce the potential harm that could be caused.
Smart, perfect. Adrian, Jane, go up.
So I've gone through my head and I've decided not to ask my question. I went back and forth like 1,000 times about, well, no. Okay. As a cisgender straight ally, I would love to know what are things that I could do better that's not, I don't know. I don't even know where to start in my questions. I'm very frustrated with my school right now because so I feel like I just want to vent. So I'm going to go on mute because I can't figure out my question. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's one of the questions that we'd actually been preparing for, right? I hear you, and I appreciate you thinking this through, but it's probably, if I'm hearing where you might be going to with this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's what can non-LGBTQ teachers do to support LGBTQ teachers and colleagues within international schools? Yeah.
Yeah, basically, what could I do when there's people like I'm pushing and there's a lot of sensible pushback I'm getting around like wanting to make sure that things that we're doing to do the push are still safe for our community. And so like I worry, am I pushing in a way that actually could be creating unsafe spaces for queer individuals in my school? So for example, I would like to do an opt-in pronouns where you're not forced, you don't have to, you can choose to. And the pushback is that, well, people could opt in and we haven't done the work, which is true, enough work to create more safety in the school. So if they opt in and they start, because our signatures you can't stop it from going out. So if your signature says they, them, no matter who you email from a school email, it will be in there. And so there's no ability to like, oh, I want to take it out to email this person and put it in to email that person. And if you're emailing to families who may not be inclusive, is this opt-in actually creating not safety? But I also feel like if you don't allow somebody to choose what they want to do, like they don't have to choose to opt in, aren't we just as culpable to like not pushing some of those conversations? And I don't know. And I feel like maybe I'm wrong because I'm cis, but I don't know. So that's why it's a lot. And I don't know if I'm just angry myself. So I just literally, while we were on the call, reached out to another organization, because I reached out to our Human Rights Commission, who's like a government mandated people to keep people safe. And they're like, kids are trans in second grade. I'm like, yeah. So like, I was like flabbergasted. I'm like, the government organization ain't even with the shits. Oh, sorry, this is recorded. Sorry, recording. So I don't know. And maybe I'm just venting, and maybe I need a whole nother conversation. I'll put my email. I'm just really frustrated, and I feel like maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Maybe, I don't know, Kanako or Justin, maybe one of you want to have a quick response to that. And then I want to have an opportunity for you all to leave your details, maybe your email addresses. How can people contact you? Maybe we want to put that in the chat. And yeah, Adrian, it would be great for you to reach out and to chat to any one of us, right? But these are things that everyone is thinking about, right? And it's, where do we have the time, the opportunity to unpack this? So to either one of you, Kanako or Justin, if you.
I mean, I have my pronouns in my email signature, but I am also cisgender. So I have not really had any pushback from anybody, and I personally don't hesitate to share my pronouns because that's not where I'm gonna get pushback. And so I can't really, Adrian, I guess I'm in the same place as you are. Justin?
Yeah, it's pronouns are really important, and I'm also agree it should be an opt-in type thing. I also understand the argument. It's like, no, like we all need to share our pronouns in this space because this is the type of space that we're in, and we need to be inclusive and show our allyship towards all identities, especially like in ALOC spaces. So I understand that perspective as well. And also, I'm a bit tired of talking about pronouns because that is like, I've noticed in schools, that's the be all end all of things. And I noticed that even in my own context too. It's like pronouns are really, really important. I know like schools have done months and months and months of training and of talks and discussions with the EJB committee about pronouns. And it's like exhausting. And they do matter, I think, in the grand scheme of things. Ultimately, like what really matters is we need to have policies protecting queer and trans people, students, teachers. We need representation and queer LGBTQIA plus people like in leadership. And we need to be teaching these things in our classrooms. Like that to me holds more priority than like, and I don't care if my colleague has their pronouns like in their emails. Yeah, I notice, and that's a signal to me that that person is probably an ally. It's just, I'd like schools to also look beyond that and do that work and also do the work that centers like the kids in our classrooms as well, you know?
Yeah, awesome. And that was a great segue just to closing statements, and just thinking about that. And you know, I like how you frame that once again, right? It's having policies and procedures in place that protects all children, that protects everyone, irregardless of your sexuality. That shouldn't matter. We should have all of these policies and practices in place that protect everyone, right? We forget that education and schooling is about community, but it's about people, right? And how do we make sure that all people feel valued, respected, and included within their communities? Okay. Justin and Kanako, can you please share with people how to contact you? And then I think our session will come to a close. Awesome, wonderful.
Yeah, just thank you for this space. I just typed in my Twitter. I'm not really using Twitter much anymore, but more LinkedIn, and there's my email address too. I've also started looking into consulting work as well to help schools and teachers bring about like the teaching of these concepts. And then Christina and I are doing a presentation with CIS in 2 weeks about querying the curriculum. So registration is open, I think, until the day before. It's a virtual conference, so definitely check that out. And if maybe Nang, if you have the link for Fandy's website, where another presentation is coming up about intersectionality in the classroom that I'll be presenting. We're going to be talking a little bit more about not just queer and gender identities, but also the intersection of other marginalized identities within that. So if you're keen to learn more, you can check those out, and also just reach out to me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or via email.
Awesome, thank you. Kanako?
Yeah, same. Like I said at the beginning, we cannot do this work alone. And we need to tap into the resources we have in the community. And, you know, I'm not an expert on any of this, and I still will reach out to other people for help. And we just have to support each other, because it is easy to feel alone, but we're not. We have this, right? We have this group, we have this community. And so, yeah, just center your why, center your students. And yeah, thank you so much for this space.
You guys have been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for just being open to learning together, right? And again, that pays a big tribute to Kevin and to the ILOC team. Thank you so much for just providing us this space and this opportunity, right? Like when Adrian, you're like, yeah, I just want to vent. Sometimes I feel like that's good, right? We get that opportunity because we have this space, and I'm so appreciative again, once more. Thank you so much to all of you for giving up some part of your Saturday. Again, apologies for being late. And I look forward to connecting with each of you in some way that we can. Over to you, Kevin. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ruwan, Kanako, and Justin. I'm going to turn it over to Rama for closing remarks. And like we said, and we always will say, it's more than a month. When we hear about querying the curriculum, it's not about, you know, and I'm all for celebrate identities in a month, but it's about constant ongoing work and making sure that, like Justin and others said, being seen, heard, valued, and affirmed. We're excited to launch some recruitment stuff next week. And we actually looked around to see like what's missing in the world of recruitment. And like I said, we want to do it differently, because we know there's a lot of stuff that goes on. But it'll be free, and you'll notice some questions that are on there that probably aren't on other platforms. So I'm gonna turn it over to Rama.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you, Justin, Kanako, and Ridwan. I've learned so much from this session today. And one of the things that is coming back up all the time is educate, educate, educate in order to agitate. And what I'm noticing about schools around the world, educational institution, is that they're willing to, once they're willing to make the first step of acknowledgement, they go from 0 to 60. So they go from acknowledging to, hey world, look what we're doing, instead of just doing the work and just being quiet about the work that they're doing and just focusing their energy on what they're supposed to do. And I think that's truly a detrimental to our students. And that's detrimental to the teachers who are trying to do the work in the classroom. As an educator, I tell my students about my own biases so that when I make a mistake, they can call me out on it. And that is something that they also need to practice. And I wish that as an educator, my administrators gave me that grace. They gave me the grace of supporting me, gave me the grace of saying, oh, Rama, thank you for pointing this out, instead of being angry about the fact that I'm pointing out something. When I say something, gift. And today, the three of you have provided us a gift. So thank you so much for reminding us that our shared humanity really is something that we need to continue to cultivate and foster. Thank you, everybody, for being here today.
Thank you, Rama. With that, we'll see y'all soon. There are self-care, just to share real quick what we got going on. It's been a busy March. I can't believe the month's almost over, y'all. It's crazy. But self-care Sundays tomorrow for BIPOC educators. Advocacy circles next week with Cheryl Land. Let them lead. You don't want to miss Christina and BBIS Social Justice Committee is next week. IDH webinar is being hosted. Justin is on that session with Fandy, and then our book clubs closing out the month, and orientation if you're a new member or a new school. Thank you all for coming out, taking up space, and continuing to be learners and doers and supporters of each other. So we appreciate you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
I gotta bounce, y'all. I'm late for my family chat. Thanks for hosting this space, and y'all are wonderful and fabulous, and this just means the world to me.
We appreciate
Let's
you.
say hi to Better,
Sorry?
your partner.